Good evening. Good evening. I'm Larry Souter, and welcome to Stories of Amazing Grace. We're coming to you from Victor Chapel at the Madison Church of Christ in Madison, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us on YouTube, Facebook, by radio, podcasting, and for this live audience. Although a little small tonight because of the coronavirus, we're glad that you're here tonight. Our theme scripture comes from Romans 8, 38 through 39. We'll try a different version tonight, the easy-to-read version. Yes, I am sure that nothing can separate us from God's love. Not death, life, angels, or ruling spirits. I'm sure that nothing now, nothing in the future, no powers, nothing above us or nothing below us, nothing in the whole created world will ever be able to separate us from the love God has shown us in Christ Jesus our Lord. Well, listen to these two statements. God is still in the restoration business, and grace can be found in unusual places. Those statements were made by tonight's guest. His name is Rick Sturgis, and he knows how God can transform a life because his life has been transformed. He knows about drinking, he knows about drugs, but now he knows God, and he's helping others find God. Not in a church per se, but in a cigar lounge, a rather unusual place. I paid a visit to Rick's Cigar Lounge and spoke to some of the patrons and found out this.
Actually, I found Rick's Cigar Lounge by mistake. I was looking for another business. I pulled into the parking lot and they were actually just putting the place together. Having just moved to the area and smoked cigars, I thought that this was going to be interesting, and it was. And eventually we got to talking to a few of the guys that frequented the place, and they were interested in starting a men's Bible study. And so we started the 33 series and a few other things, and then it's just kind of morphed into this wonderful thing. And in the meantime, I started going to Pastor Mike's church, and I asked him if he would baptize me. And so not only was I the first person saved at Rick's Cigar Lounge, I was also the first guy to be baptized at Rick's Cigar Lounge. And quite an experience. Totally changed my life. Totally turned everything around. And for a person that's hugging 70 years old, it's been quite an experience.
Well, I was in a rough part of my life, and I gotten in a little trouble. And that morning, I had this incredible urge just to come talk to Rick. When I came back that night, we were sitting and talking, and just helped me through the situation. We began to pray. I got saved that night. And it was July 24th, 2017, which is also my birthday. He's mentored me and shown me the way a godly man should live his life.
At Rick's Cigar Lounge here, we the safety that I feel expressing my past and my future with gentlemen who are following the faith and trying to walk the line to the Lord is. That's what makes Rick's what it is. It's the comfortable feeling that he provides us, not only a place for us to meet, but also the atmosphere in itself that has made this a part of my life that I don't want to miss. Our 2 days a week means a lot to me.
I've always been a little hesitant at church to get into testimonies and life stories because it really reads like a R-rated movie. But here at the lounge, we're able to really connect with each other, share our testimonies, and you would really be surprised that how common that is, how much you have in common with other guys in their search for basically the same things in their lives.
You don't have to worry about somebody saying something negative to you, and if you express an opinion on something, they may debate you, but it's all open and everybody's friendly and loving towards each other, and If you have a problem, you can ask the opinion of the court, as I call it, the brotherhood here, and get several different takes before you make a decision on something.
I know that when I speak up, people are actually listening to me and they're not judging me. And that was always sort of a scary part of pronouncing my faith, if you will, is how people were going to look at me or judge me, because there's a lot of judgment in this world. And this here, you don't have judgment. You have men who've gone through or are going through, have been there before, and can offer guidance and scriptures and everything that would make you feel at ease. And that's what Rick brings to me, is ease of heart.
And Rick Sturgis, come on up. Have a seat. Thank you for being here on such short notice. We had a cancellation and called you, and you said yes. So I'm glad that you're here.
Not sure why.
But we're going to find out. Well, let's talk about your background a little bit. You were born a perfect baby, I'm sure. Everything was fine when you were born. What happened?
Still a long road of bad choices starting in my teens.
Were there bad influences that contributed to that?
I don't think there were such bad influences other than rebellious attitude or spirit.
Father, mother, good people?
Good, hardworking people. Ended up divorced. A lot of drama within the marriage. I was the oldest son, so saw a lot of things that probably young kids shouldn't have seen at an early age.
Rough teenage years?
I started working at 15, so I'd quit school. And my dad's, I guess, looking back at it, was reverse psychology, telling me I'd be a street sweeper. So, because I quit school. So I was bound and determined to prove to him that I could do more than he could by the time I was his age, and became quite dysfunctional.
Why do you think he did not encourage you?
I'm not sure if they knew that. My dad was born in 42. There wasn't a lot of positive affirmation. There wasn't a lot of the things that you hear nowadays, how important our words are. And I'm sure most dads still struggle with sharing their feelings of how proud they are of their kids and stuff like that.
Are your parents still living?
My dad passed away a few years ago, and my mom's still living. She's going to be 80.
And what was your relationship in these later years?
I think part of that restoration has taken place, and through the years, just a lot of forgiveness and understanding that, they were probably doing the best that they could through those years.
So they convinced you that you would not amount to anything, and you kind of accepted that, or you rebelled against that? Or
I think I overcompensated.
Overcompensated?
Yeah. So I became a workaholic, and it wasn't until I was saved and heard a message around 32 years old that you didn't need your earthly father's approval, you had your heavenly father's approval, that it was kind of liberating and got a lot of freedom from that. But prior to that, I spent a lot of time chasing that and looking for his approval, looking for him to say, I'm proud of you. So I started working at 15, became a stitching room foreman. I worked where we grew up in Maine. It was nothing but shoe factories. So that's where all my family, granddad, everybody worked in shoe factories. So I started there, and I was married at 19, was a purchasing agent, became a superintendent of a shoe factory there, and later on became a vice president of manufacturing, and went overseas to Puerto Rico and Dominican and set up some factories there. And by that time was a full-blown alcoholic and cocaine addict, divorced. I was 24, had 3 children that were 5 and 6 and 2, I believe, and came home from the Dominican. Worked for a company called Rocky Boots, William Brook Shoe Company, and set up some factories. And basically they saw the trouble I was in. They said, you need to go back home. We love the work that you're doing, but your life's a mess. So I came home pretty much homeless and stayed with my stepdad and my mom. And that's when I got into the band. The shoe factories had pretty much all closed up in New England. There was sporadic jobs here or there.
Let's take a look at some pictures here that you're referring to a band and referred to your wife. Been married once, twice? Or?
Second time, 30 years now, almost 30 years.
Is your current wife?
Current wife.
Colleen?
Yes.
Okay. And you met her where?
We were playing we played Friday and Saturday nights at dance halls and clubs like that.
She was a singer?
No, she was just there. She had just gone through AA herself, and her sponsor had brought her, and we met. And I said something romantic like, "Are we dancing?" And she said no, and left. And I think I saw her a few weeks later and tried a different line, and we met and started dating.
There you go. All right. Now, who is this?
That's Hank Thompson. He was a country music Hall of Famer that was up in Maine on tour. Our band opened for him.
You got a next shot here of this your band?
Yeah,
Okay. Pretty famous band?
in the New England area, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. First child?
I think that's Brianna. I think that's number 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Number 4, rather.
Okay.
She was our 4th. Yeah, that's her.
Okay.
That's them two sitting out there someplace.
All right.
My 20-year-old son, and Bree is 22.
This your family?
That's most of them. My daughter, Sam, Tanner, Bree, and Rick. And one missing, the military one, Tony. He was probably in Iraq at that time.
There's you and your wife.
It was at my middle son's wedding a few years ago.
And the next one here is a picture of your son, correct?
Yeah, that's Tony.
Pretty proud moment here.
Yeah, he got pinned for, well, that was his wedding, but he recently got pinned for Chief Warrant Officer, and he's done 2 long 18-month tours in Iraq, and now he's a Chief Warrant Officer.
Yeah. Let's go back to your life here. You're involved with drugs and drinking.
Mm-hmm.
How heavily and how long did that last?
It lasted through that band stage, until 1989. I rolled a car over 5 times and was out in the woods. Should have been dead. Took down a pole and a light, trees, and I walked through the woods thinking I was walking to my car, and I remember saying, "Okay, God, if you get me out of this without going to jail," because I was back in the shoe factory at the time, and I probably had a couple hundred people that were working in that factory for me. So it was really just pride. I had no grid for God. I'd never spent any time learning about Him. Went to Catholic school, I think, for 1 year, so I knew a little bit about having to say a lot of Our Fathers and Hail and other prayers because I was so bad. But
So it really wasn't a personal relationship
no,
with God.
it was out of desperation, see if He'd make a deal. I said, if you get me out of this without going to jail, I swear on my 3 kids' lives I'll never drink again. And so I walked back out, had no clue where I was. I was very drunk and walked back out to the road. And by that time, the ambulance and all the police cars, state police were there. And this big state trooper brought me to his car, asked me if I was alone, didn't know how I was still alive, and basically said, have a seat. And I said, you might as well arrest me now. I've had a dozen rum and cokes in the last hour, so I know I'm way over the limit and quite drunk. And he just looked at me and said, "You know what, get your butt to the hospital and don't ever let me catch you out drinking and driving again." And so I wish I could say that was the beginning where it really like lit up, but it wasn't, because from there I had met my wife and we dated, and I was living 50 minutes away, so we lived together, and my kids would come visit, and this went on for about 6 months, and had never dealt with any of what we taught and celebrate recovery about hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And so there was a lot of jealousy, anger, resentment, untrust, whatever you could imagine. And so it turned our 6 months into a nightmare, basically, and we had a knockdown, drag-out fight, as I call it. She was going to call the police, and instead she went in and started packing, so that was the end of our relationship. And I'm sitting on the couch just realizing you are the biggest loser on the planet because you're going to do this for a second time. And happened to be flipping through the television channels, and 30 years ago it wasn't what it is now, so it was pretty limited. And I think we used to watch a lot of Father Downing murder mysteries and Touched by an Angel. This particular channel happened to come up, and it was the end of Charles Stanley's Sunday night sermon. And he was at the place where obviously God had intended for me to hear it, because he said, if you're sick and tired of the mess you've made in your life and you're totally and unconditionally willing to surrender, then say this prayer with me. And I remember saying, I am the biggest train wreck that I know. I need to say this prayer. And I said the sinner's prayer and to come into my life that night. And I knew that time I was radically saved and changed, that he had removed everything I'd ever done. Everything I repented for, the weight was removed off my shoulders. It was like an amazing feeling at that time. And I remember my wife came out and she said, "Did you say that prayer?" And I said, "Yeah, did you?" And she said, "Yep." And I said, "What are we going to do now?" And she obviously had a spiritual revelation at that moment and said, "We need to get married." And I'm thinking, you were just calling the police on me, and we just had this terrible fight, and now we need to get married. And so she's a nurse, and she went to work at 7 o'clock that night and called me 7 the next morning and said, "I found this church in the phone book. Meet me at this Assemblies of God church." And we had no idea about any denominations, nor did it really matter. We found a church, and they loved us from the moment we walked in. It felt like home. We told them our circumstances, and we wanted to get married, and they had a retired couple that was running their marriage ministry, teaching My Faith course. And so we had to take that course before we could get married. And I talked to the pastor about getting out of the band, because I knew if I stayed there, I would go back to drinking and smoking. All the guys smoked my brands of cigarettes. And
Did you smoke at the time?
I did. I smoked a lot. Drank a lot, drugged a lot, did everything you could ever want to do. And I remember the pastor, I was just new, had no grid for God. He said, "Let's go to my office, Rick. I got a great answer for you." And I'm thinking, surely he has some crystal ball or something that's going to be pretty magical, that's going to take care of all this stuff. And I couldn't wait to see it. And instead, we knelt at his coffee table, and he said, "Let's just pray, and you're going to continue to pray, and God's going to answer this prayer about you getting out of this band and leaving that behind you." And I said, "That sounds pretty weak. Is that all you got?" And he said, "It's more than enough." And so we prayed that night, and I continued to pray. And it was 3 weeks later I woke up, and God had revealed that I was done in the band that night. It was a Thursday. And we were booked to play at a big place for New Year's. It was in October, so we had a couple months before we were playing, which is the guy's biggest paying night compared to your normal Friday, Saturday nights, like a $3,000 gig. And I called them up and told them I was done in the band, and they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because if I don't leave this now, I will ruin another marriage." And I turned and walked away from it that night and never went back.
Really? You don't play at home or anything?
Nope. I sang at church for 10 years. The pastor would give me Gaither's cassettes.
Yeah.
They weren't CDs back then. And so every Sunday I learned a new Gaither's song that I would sing the following Sunday.
And what age was this?
So we got married, I think we got married in 1991. So I'll be 59 in March. I think I was about 29 or 30 years old. 89 is when I had the wreck, and then we got married in 91.
And never went back to drugs or drinking?
No. I was so busy in church, and after a couple years, probably the first year in church, the pastor would make announcements, and for a long time they made announcements about driving the bus. And so our prayer for the beginning of our marriage was to have our family restored and have my 3 children come live with us full time. And so every Sunday we'd sit there, and he'd be going through the announcements, or the associate pastor, and they were always asking for a bus driver, and they had a big old school bus driver. And I remember telling my wife, I said, "Surely one of these idiots in this church is going to volunteer to drive that bus, right? I mean, there's 250 people here." And the next week we showed up at church, and I looked at her and I said, "I think I'm the idiot that's supposed to volunteer to drive the bus." And I did. And I went up and told them, said, "I think I'm supposed to drive that bus." And so I didn't know. I thought we were going to elderly communities, picking people up on Wednesday nights, whatever, for midweek service. And it turns out that when my 3 children were not with us, they weren't allowed to go to church with us. Well, the first night that I'm being trained on the route of the bus, I realized we're going in all the housing projects, and my kids lived in one of those housing projects. And after learning that I drove the bus, they asked their mother, "Hey, can we go to church with our friends on that church bus?" And so for years they came to church on the church bus, and my wife taught missionettes, I taught Royal Rangers, and so we got to have our kids in church with us through those years. When I taught men's groups at Celebrate Recovery, one of the things I was always reminded of when it came to God's restoration and His timing wasn't, it doesn't always work out to our timing. His timing is perfect. So that our first 7 years of our marriage, we were at church every time the doors were open. I just remember praying. We prayed and cried a lot about having the kids come live with us, and it wasn't for 7 years. I mean, the first prayer he answered about getting out of the band was in 3 weeks, and it was absolutely crystal clear. The next one was 7 years.
Okay.
And then on a weekend visit, my oldest son called home and asked his mom about coming to live with us, and she said, okay, if that's what you guys want to do. They were about 12 or 13 at that time, and he mentioned about learning to do guy stuff and shaving, and so they came to live with us that September, started school with us, and I think we're going into our seventh year. And I was working for a small cleaning company. I'd been there for a few years. It was pretty amazing. I only had 3 jobs during all my drinking and drugging and running those shoe factories. And in the first 10 years, I had so many jobs, you name it, from being a security guard at a hospital. I mean, here I am, clean, sober, church-going guy, thinking that surely this is going to be an easy journey now. And my wife's family is asking her, what's wrong with Rick? Why'd you marry this guy? He can't even keep a job. And it's like, I don't know. And every time I'd come home broken, crying, she'd be like, don't worry about it. God knows He's drying up the stream because He knows if you stay there, you're going to miss out on blessings. I'm like, that's easy for you to say. We just had 3 children come live with us. And so it was really testing of our faith during those times, but it really was His perfect timing and perfect plan for our lives. Every one of those jobs, whether it was selling payroll service or whatever it was equipping me and preparing me for my future, things that I never learned in school, but working for a payroll guy who was actually a computer teacher back in those days, and the things that I was able to learn that I never learned because I didn't go to high school.
But you can look back and see that God was working during that time, but at the time you couldn't see that.
It didn't make sense. Luckily, my wife was very well grounded, and she was a prayer warrior, still is, and it was comforting. I can't say it made it easier because I would always question Him and say, "Why, God, is this happening? I'm the best worker I've ever been." But it was always about making that next step to someplace because I was ready to settle at the first job I would make the kind of money I used to make, and that wasn't His plan.
Besides owning this lounge in White House, Tennessee, you're the chief marketing officer for a cleaning company. Is that correct?
Just took over as the president of the company a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Okay, I looked at the website and you were number 2. Now you're number 1.
Yeah.
So maybe you can give me a job if I need one.
If you want to be in the cleaning business. And that was where I realized He was taking me. I worked for a small company in Maine that had gone out of business and started my own company. Now the kids are living with us. We're going into our 8th year of marriage, and my wife calls me up and says, "You're not going to believe this." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "We're going to have a baby." And I'm like, "How does that happen? We've been married 8 years and never had a baby," and we had a baby. And she's now 22 years old, and 2 years later, I was on a motorcycle ride with her brothers, and she made the same phone call and said, "You're never going to believe it." I'm like, "What?" She said, "We're going to have a baby." I'm like, "No."
How does that happen?
Absolutely not. I'm putting this motorcycle right into the next tree that I go by. And so now we had 5 children. I'm working for a cleaning company in Maine that goes out of business. I start my own company. My older boys are working with me overnights, even though they were 13, 14, 15 years old. And then a company out of Virginia asked me to go work for them, so I took a position with them. Was there for 6 years running operations for the East Coast, and made a connection with the guy that I work for now, and went to work for him 21 years ago and worked my way up through the company, and all those things that I learned 30 years ago started to come into play as I was running sales and marketing, and then moving into operations, and then taking over the company.
Did the band play a part in there anyway? Music?
The band played a part like it did with my middle son when he worked at a small hospital. He had done 2 18-month tours in Iraq, and he was working at a really small hospital up in Maine, and he hated it. He wasn't sure if he was going back in the Army, and I remember God just gave me a word for him and said, maybe this is just something that's short-term, that you're going to meet the love of your life, and you're going to meet your wife. And he was only there 6 months, and it drove him crazy because he had been to Mosul and Kuwait and Talil, and he was in Saddam's palace. He was in the war for 36 months, right out of 18 years old. So everything seemed quite small, and I remember just making that comment to him, and sure enough, he found his wife. She became a flight nurse. They got married a few years ago, bought a house, had a baby, and God's done a lot of restoration in his life from where he came from. But I think the band, that was the only purpose, because for me, it was just a time to go say that I was making money doing something on the weekend, but it was a time to go drink and party. But through that, God used that timing to introduce me to my wife.
How did you wind up in Tennessee?
So we moved from the Assemblies of God Church after 10 years. Our children had gone through the entire youth group program, the 3 older ones, and now we have 2 little ones that are in 1st and 2nd grade, and they go into a private Christian school that also had a church. It was a vineyard church. Different than what we had been going to. They kept asking us to go to church with their friends, and I was reluctant because we got married at this church. This is where our family and friends and our older kids met their spouses through youth group and all that. And a guy that worked for me out of Tulsa was a retired pastor, and I remember him saying, Rick, you can't look at us changing pastors, but you have to look at us changing pastures. And sometimes God moves us into different seasons in our life, and right now, it's a season for you to sow into your younger children's lives, because the church that we had gone to had moved, didn't really have a robust student ministry. They had gone through several youth pastors, and the congregation obviously was getting older, and there wasn't as much emphasis in that ministry. So there was really nothing for little kids at the time. Mm-hmm. So we started going to this other church. They were going to school there. Church was open for 17 years and decided to close, and when they were in 6th and 8th grade, and it was my one opportunity to get out of the snow. And I said, we're going to move someplace. Had no idea where. You think after being saved for 20 years, it'd be really easy, and you'd hear from God really simply. But I remember we were selling our house. The kids had no school to go to. It was in April or May, and I'm kind of freaking out, and I'm sitting in the hot tub saying, God, if my wife had mentioned on a motorcycle trip, first it was going to be Las Vegas or Nevada area where her niece and nephew were, then it was going to be Florida or South Carolina. I just wanted something warm. And she blurted out, how about Tennessee? And I had been coming down here for about a dozen years because one of the accounts I'd sold 18 years ago was Centennial Medical Center and Skyline, and we've been cleaning those accounts for many years. So I had a familiarity, and I think God used that instead of me being so quick to dismiss and say, no, we're not going there, he used that familiarity to say, yeah, that might work. Mm. So as I'm sitting in the hot tub saying, okay, God, if you want us to go to Tennessee, would you send over a shooting star or something? And I remember seeing this blazing shooting star, and I says, was that just going to happen on its own, or was that really you? Would you send one more if that's really you? And one more never came. But Charles Stanley came. I had a TV in the window where we watched football games through into the hot tub. And Charles Stanley was, again, at perfect timing at one of his messages. And he says, if you want to know if you're in the will of God, all those things that you're holding in your hand, that he's given you the ability to dream and to plan, if you'll open your hand and just release them and say, God, not my will, but your will be done, he will give you a peace about those things that are troubling your heart. Mm-hmm. And he did. And so we didn't know one person. We had no clue where we were going. She had found Hendersonville Christian Academy, and our son Tanner wanted to play football. So I came down for work and was able to check out the school. They found this crazy house up on Tyree Springs in White House that was way more than anything that we've ever thought of living in, but they kept bugging me to look at it. And the people that owned that house that were selling it were members at Long Hollow, and they said, this is the house for you guys. We just feel that this is your house. And I'm thinking, there's no way. As it would turn out, we moved here, bought the house, found one school, one church, one house, and through the move and through my wife's VA loan and all the other processes, we moved here, got twice the house, and saved $500 a month because of taxes and whatever. I don't remember all the different things, but it was quite amazing how God worked that. But that's how we moved here, was for school for the kids. And that's where we started.
You're still with the cleaning company. And then how did the Rick Cigar come about?
So we started at Long Hollow right out of the gate, and my wife has always been really fast to volunteer and sign me up for stuff, whether it was working security at a Matthew West concert or whatever. And she said, hey, we're going to be small group leaders. And I said, oh, we're not. And she said, we are, and you are. And I said, oh, no, we're not. And so we were small group leaders. And she signed me up, and we went to a big thing at Long Hollow. We're sitting in the auditorium at all these round tables, and I do not like doing that type of stuff any more than I like doing this type of stuff. And I just told her, I says, we're leaving. Nobody's showing up, and we're getting out of here. And then all of a sudden, all these other people started coming from different circles. And it was like watching Rudolph, the misfit, Christmas Island. All these misfits are coming to our table, and I'm like, well, I know we're misfits, but why are all these other people coming here? And they're like, do we know you guys? It seems like you looked familiar. We saw Rick Sturgis in the log for all the small group leaders, and said, no, we don't know anybody. We just moved here. Anyways, we started small group every Wednesday night. We had 8 to 12 couples at our house. It went on for about 3 years, and my wife ruined my life after that. We had probably some best friends that we had made since we were here, and our daughter's basketball coach and his wife were part of it, and it was just an amazing time. We learned a lot, we grew a lot, and then she decided to do some other ministry things, so we stopped the small group, and I was doing a lot of traveling every week, so there were times that I wasn't able to be there to help support, cook, and do the facilitating, so it did get to be a lot for her, and so small group stopped, and I had been doing this 20-mile bike ride in White House since we moved there. So, I remember getting on my bike and whining and crying like normal and questioning God and saying, why would you let my wife ruin my life? I don't know one person in this whole town, and I've been here for 3 years, and now all my best friends are gone. And he put it on my heart to open up this cigar shop, and I said, I know that's not you, God. I just know, because that's against anything politically correct, socially correct. I know the church that I go to has no interest in that type of stuff, so why would you even give me that thought? So I just blew it off, and it was relentless, and it wouldn't go away, and that's usually how me and God banter back and forth. Rick goes kicking and screaming like he does when my wife volunteers me for stuff, and then ultimately I give in, and whatever it has to do, has to do. And so I finally said it was just keeping me awake, and I had this sense of anxiety and urgency. And I said, God, I run a $60 million company. I have hundreds of people around the country that I work with. I travel every week. I don't have time for this. And I don't want people at our house to begin with. And you gave me that small group, and now you're telling me to open up a cigar shop. I certainly don't want to be in that environment. And when it finally wouldn't go away, I just said, okay, whatever, God, if that's what you want to do. I have no idea what it looks like. I have no idea about running a small business. This is going to have to be all you. And a few weeks down the road, I woke up, and he had really spoke to my heart and said, this has nothing to do with cigars. That's going to be the vehicle that will bring men together that will never step into a church. And this will be the time that they will be able to see me through you and through the study groups that you guys will be doing. And I just remember I just remember regretting arguing with him for all that time. And so we started. We found a place to rent. Had no idea about ordering cigars, buying cigars. I don't even like smoking cigars. I have to chew a piece of gum when I do, and everyone thinks I'm half crazy, but it's just what God used as a vehicle to bring a lot of men together. And everybody came in with the same story. Man, I've been here 2 years. I've been here 5 years. I don't know anybody in town. This is amazing. And so we started 33 of the series, and we had half a dozen guys get saved our first year. And Pastor Mike Peaceall came over and baptized them out behind the old shop. And they all found churches and got plugged in. One of the guys in the interview was actually run sound over at Gateway, and he used to play guitar for Johnny Paycheck, and now he's on the worship team over there, and it's just been very humbling.
What is it about churches that turns people off, that the cigar store turns them on?
I don't know if it's anything particularly that turns them off. I think it's just guys like me that were drifted so far away. Bill's story was he went to church with his mom and his sister, and And when he came in, he said, my mom would be terribly disappointed. I haven't been to church in 40 years. He was on the road with Johnny Paycheck, living that crazy life that he described in the interview. And I think they just didn't think they could find their way back to him. And so church was really not the issue. It was really their relationship of God allowing them to heal their hearts and give them back their whole hearts to a point where now they could trust him with their lives and surrender and basically ask him to come into their lives. And that's happened dozens of times. We work with a lot of guys that are dealing and battling with addiction. We just sponsored a guy that's getting out of prison that's going to a halfway house, the Hope Center, and our guys have collected all the money. We have a Saturday morning Bible study. It's a study video series that we told you about, 33, and then Tuesday night we do other series or sermons. Sometimes we'll have Pastor Brad from New Heights or Pastor Mike Peasaw from Gateway will come up and actually do a live men's group at the shop. But it's been kind of a 4-year journey, and it's continued to evolve. These guys have built relationships outside the shop and gotten plugged back into churches and really found God's grace upon their life. And through all of my train wrecks in my life, and God giving me the ability to be transparent with that, and being able to walk in those healings that I've gotten over the years. And it wasn't all at once. It was over a long period of time. A lot of times it was when I was on my prayer time and out there biking, that he would reveal something and I would either have to repent for or release forgiveness for. It was a long journey. It's still a journey. It's an everyday journey to surrender and turn your life over to him.
Let's take a look at some pictures from the shop. Okay, this is outside the shop. And the next one here, some cigars. That's in the back room. This is where the good stuff is, right? Mm-hmm. Is this Monte Cristo? Is that a good brand?
Yeah.
What's a good cigar cost me? One good cigar.
10 to 35.
35? If I paid 50, would I get a better cigar?
They all taste like garbage. I'm not going to lie. Chew a piece of gum.
Yeah.
I can't even say what I normally say, but if you want to know what your breath tastes like the next morning after a cigar, just think of something really bad.
You are the owner of the shop, right? Okay. Next one here.
I'm not into
some more
the cigars.
How about the Flathead? Is that a good brand?
Yeah, that's the CAO brand. They're a large company that has bought most of the cigar companies out there now.
Yeah, we got a fellow smoking here. Looks like he's enjoying himself. You know him?
Yeah, he works actually over at Hendersonville Medical Center. Yeah. We have a lot of physicians. We have a lot of NFL players, retired Titans players, CEOs of hospitals. We probably have 12 or 15 pastors that come in and work on their sermons, plan their Israel trips, fellowship. That used to be one of my prayers for Bill, because I knew after he got saved he wanted to be baptized, and Pastor Mike would come in on occasion and fellowship with the guys, and I always used to just pray, allow him to meet the man before he meets the minister, so that he would have that trust and they would have that connection. And sure enough, that God really ordained that time together for them to bond and grow and build that chemistry. And then he got up the courage to ask Mike to baptize him and started serving at his church. And 3 years later, he's a totally different person. Mm.
I asked one of your patrons there, what is the connection between cigar smoke and spiritual things? What's your role that?
I'm not sure. It's funny because most of the people that I know that frequent cigar lounges, there's a certain type of brotherhood already established just in people who love cigars and smoke cigars. There's a certain camaraderie, and this just enhances all that. You know, it allows you to break the ice over a cigar, start talking, and eventually sharing your lives and your dreams and aspirations.
It's a non-threatening environment, isn't it?
It's sort of like a round of golf. I always said, when I was arguing with God, I'm not going to meet someone at Walmart. I'm not going to meet someone at Dunkin' Donuts that I can build a friendship with, because there doesn't allow you the time or the intimacy to learn about somebody. So to me, it always reminded me when I used to take customers out to golf, by the end of a 4-hour round, you pretty much knew about their family. You understood their faith, if they had faith. If not, you could be that light to that person and maybe share part of your story. But that's what this is. It's just a vehicle. That cigar is a 1-hour commitment. And I remember telling my wife and the kids when we opened the first shop before we bought this building that the most humbling thing about this small business compared to running a big national company was not the money that people were coming and spending, but their time, because of how valuable people's time is, and the fact that guys like Todd come up and sit on the front porch for an hour, and we get to share about the Lord and our faith and have those intimate conversations and build one another up. And a lot of times it's difficult. There's a lot of people in our town. We started out with sticky notes every place. People heard that what we were doing, they would come in and ask us to pray for a little girl that had brain cancer or someone who was terminally ill. And we had sticky notes every place, and then we had to create a whiteboard that we read off the names every Saturday, every Tuesday. Guys come in during the week and pray over those names of people who are just battling a lot of painful things. Just gives us the opportunity to lift those names up and be part of our community, to really invest and come alongside them when they're hurting. When you have two guys that are there with someone who's going through a terrible time, it just eases that burden. In the same way we celebrate the victories in their lives, when they come through addictions and they've had sobriety for 6 months or 2 years. I would say a lot of our guys, we don't do any alcohol. Cigars are bad enough, but we've never done any alcohol, and everyone always said that, all the people that want to counsel you of the world say, oh, you need to do alcohol, this 400% markup, because there's no money in cigars. I'm like, I realize that. We've been paying all the bills for 4 years to keep this thing open. Used to have money to do stuff, and now it's all in the shop. But it's a ministry, and it's what we do. It's not a business to make money. It's to sow into our community and hopefully have a legacy where people can come and be safe and lift them up in prayer and come alongside them.
I think there's a weakness in the modern day church that you are fulfilling. In the modern day church, in our corporate settings, it's hello, how are you, have a good day. We can't sit down and open up and talk to someone.
Right.
And even in small groups many times, not all the case, but many times in small groups, we sit around and we drink our Cokes and eat our cookies, and we watch a little bit of TV and look to a canned sermon from the preacher perhaps as part of our lesson. But we don't get down and talk about our struggles.
Right.
I think that's a niche that you are fulfilling with your cigar store.
That is absolutely what it is. It allows these guys to be transparent and be vulnerable. Most of them have heard my story many times, and we have open discussions. The videos that we do right now are or some of them are gut-wrenching. It's a man and their idols. It starts out man in his creation, a man in his design, and it goes into a man in his traps, and there's 6 parts. And a man in his traps, it goes through everything, including the tough stuff that guys are dealing with pornography, drugs, alcohol, and then it gives you corrective action plans and how you can get healed in those places and move beyond them. You don't have to be stuck there. You can
Let me
change.
show a sample from the series 33. This is a trailer from the series. Take a look at this.
Imagine with me for a moment what could be. Imagine a world where men lead in their marriages, where men lead in raising their children, where men lead in protecting those who are weak and oppressed. It is the most important journey you could possibly be on.
Is there anything this world needs more than a bold movement of men to step up and be men?
When you look across our own lives, we can see that there's a deficit there. And there's a great need for men to rise up and be the men they've been called to be.
We're just not going to pull that out of the air. We're going to look at our model and the 33 years that Jesus lived on this earth. Men who don't transition well into middle adulthood, they usually fall to the major danger.
You find yourself in between a rock and a hard place. If you let this happen, you'll find yourself in manhood hell.
There's a lot that you can give a son, But the greatest gift you can give him is the example of integrity and a great name. That's a legacy.
Thine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So you're not talking complex ethics here, right? Don't touch that tree. That's not hard.
You see, manhood is imprinted.
If you get the young men, you win the war. You get the families, the women, the children, the money, the business, you get everything.
Imagine a world where men dominate areas of eternal significance.
When this was first mentioned, when I was at your shop, the men mentioned about the 33 series and how you had bought the books and everything for this. I thought, this is some kooky spiritual thing that you guys are doing. And then I went to search on our own website called Right Now Media that the elders provide for the church here,
Right.
and this is on there.
Yeah.
So
And those three guys are all cigar
maybe
guys.
it's something we should incorporate here as well. I don't know. This is inside of your shop. Let brotherly love continue. What's the story behind this sign?
I think the year that we opened, 2016, in November, with going into that election, it was just a sense in the country of so much division, and like it is now, but we wanted to make a difference. I didn't care what political party people were from, what color they wore, what their ethnic or work background or any of that stuff, and that was the first thing that we noticed at the other shop. You could be sitting there with an attorney, with a firefighter, and the cook from Waffle House, and whoever, and a soldier, and they'd all be sitting there, fellowship and having a cigar. And I remember just thinking, there's no place on the planet where these four people cross paths. But in this particular place, God uses that for them to have some commonality, and there's nothing that's out of balance when you're in there. It doesn't matter what your position is, and whether you're a president of a company or the cook at Waffle House. Everybody's on equal footing. We have, the steel guitar player and managers for major musicians come into our shop and live up in our area, and they come in and hang out with the same guys that we hang out with, and I think that's been very humbling for me to see people that I never would have traveled in those circles with.
Next one here is Bible study in your shop.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have a video study, sometimes you have a person teaching, correct?
We usually have 12 to 15 guys each week on Saturday morning, and then some of them will come back Tuesday, and there's new people, young people, older guys. It's a combination, but there's always people looking to come in and join.
The final shot here, the guys praying in a cigar store together. Unusual. It's a great ministry you have, I believe. Are you up to taking some questions and comments from our limited audience here? Anybody got any thoughts that they want to share? Maybe some of the patrons of the shop here even. Carol Bellis, she's a patron, I think, of the shop, yes.
Are there any women that come into the shop?
A lot of the husbands will bring their wives in, yes. We just built a new deck out back, so it's a place to get away from the smoke inside. We do have a private members lounge, and a lot of those guys will bring their wives in with them as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you have any non-cigar smokers who come?
Yeah, actually a lot of them. We always tell them, any customer that comes in, we always tell them what we're doing and when the study groups are, and that you're welcome to come in here. It doesn't matter if you smoke or not. That's not even the theme.
What type of feedback do you get from maybe the more traditional, conservative, religious people in the community? Do they jump on this and say
probably
no?
have to ask those 15 pastors that come in. I think they all see, and I can remember hearing a sermon from Pastor Robbie after Pastor David passed away at Long Hollow, and one of them was about we need to move out from the pews and into our communities and our streets, and he had talked about joining a dojo or karate studio with his family back when he was in Louisiana, New Orleans, and how nobody knew what his position was as a pastor there, but they just wanted to be part of the community and love people well and serve people, and as it would come out, over time, people say, what do you do for work? I noticed you're working out here or whatever, and it would be revealed that he was a pastor, and people would come up and ask him if he could pray for them and invite people to church, and that's really what we do. We have several people that have come to church from being invited just as customers saying, yeah, I didn't realize you guys did these study groups. I'm going to tell my husband, and we're looking for a church. And those type of things just evolve naturally. And everybody's the same way. All those guys that you see in these videos they're all ambassadors of the shop and of the faith. So they're always talking about our men's group and what it means to them and sharing those same stories that you saw.
How many members do you have currently?
We have probably 12 or 1,500 customers in our system, but we have probably 60 members. We have lockers on the other side, and I think we only have 30 lockers over there. But our consistent guys on a weekly basis, it just varies how many people are in
And those
here.
lockers are to store their cigars?
Yeah. That side of the shop has a 24/7 access, so they have an access card, and there's some guys in there at midnight, some guys in there after they get out of work at 7 in the morning. It depends.
Okay.
And not everybody goes to church. I mean, I think you talked to a couple that was on that other side. They both work at the hospital, and they come up to watch the football games, and he likes to have a cigar, and she'll smoke a cigarette once in a while, and they'll sit over there and fellowship. They know what we do. So it's not mandatory to be part of that, but it's just a ministry. One of our old pastors used to say, if people hang around long enough, they'll bump into Jesus. So you never know. They've got those people had some things going on at home with a son that they had actually asked us to pray for him during some time a couple years ago. So those things happen just out of natural connections.
What is the main struggle that rises to the top of the list that men are struggling with? Is it sex? Is it family problems, marriage? What is it?
I think they're struggling with transparency, to be vulnerable enough to get that healing that they need and not stay stuck with their. When we used to teach Celebrate Recovery, my wife always shared the same thing with the women, but dump the junk, because the more you go around thinking, I can't tell this to anybody, or I can't share this part of my life because what would they think? That whole fear of man, when you move beyond that, is when you can really walk in that transparency and that healing that God has for us. And people see that, and they're drawn to that. There's been dozens of guys that have called me and said, I don't know what's going on, but God's told me I need to come up and talk to you. And some of them were in trouble. Some of them had just been arrested. It's a variety of things. But God uses that for people to know that they're safe. They can trust you. You've shared transparently with them. And so you're not going to judge them because they went out and were drinking and driving, because you're the guy that used to do all that stuff. So I think that environment just lends to no judgment, and guys are willing to come in, as you saw, and just be transparent.
Okay. Anybody else? Marty, you got anything you want to say?
Extended period of time, you realize that you'd have them for a while. Why not coffee? Or
it wasn't.
How did cigars come in your mind?
It wasn't my idea. I was on my bike ride complaining. My wife had ruined my life by stopping our small group at our house. And God spoke really clearly and said, open a cigar shop.
Your wife hated cigars?
We both hated cigars, yeah. Yeah.
So this was your way of getting back at your wife?
No. It was an argument between me and God that, why do you want me to open up a cigar shop? I have no clue about a cigar shop. It's nothing that interests me. And like I said, a few weeks after praying about it, arguing about it, he just revealed to me it was not going to be about cigars. That was just going to be a vehicle to bring guys together. I didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense to me. It wasn't politically, socially correct. And I was quite embarrassed to think what people at our church would think about it. And I finally had to just say, okay, God, if that's really you, you're going to have to make this happen, because I had no clue about it. I was running a successful company, and the last thing I needed was a small business. But it was very apparent that he wanted me to do this, because all the doors opened, and it's been very successful on its own as a ministry.
So you Google what brands to carry, or I mean, how do you?
I don't even mess around with that stuff. I could care less about cigars, cigar vendors. It's really a ministry. My son takes care of all the social media stuff and whatever, but we don't advertise. We don't sell cigars on the internet. This is strictly a ministry. It's really not even considered a business.
So it's just,
it doesn't make any money.
It's just a byproduct of the ministry.
It's the vehicle that God told me he was going to use to bring men together where they would find community.
My husband and I are both former smokers, smoked for a long time. When he quit smoking, he decided he would take up cigars. So he was smoking a cigar one afternoon in the house, and our 3-year-old said, "What are you doing?"
Right.
And he said, "I'm smoking a cigar." She said, "Well, I want to." He said, "Okay." So he gave it to her, and she took a puff. It came out of her eyes, her ears, her nose, every orifice in her body. She choked it half to death. You won't see her there because she's 52 and she's never smoked another cigar.
Right. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's not something that we promote or advertise. It's guys that are already searching for something because they've been smoking cigars, but it's not something we always tell guys, just come on in as you are. You don't have to worry about smoking. Just come join our study groups.
Good. Appreciate you being here.
Yes.
Sharing your
Thank you
story.
for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us on Stories of Amazing Grace tonight, and we wish you a happy holiday. Have a very Merry Christmas, and all of you have a safe trip rounding home. Thank you for being here tonight.